Have you worked out that I'm really into conversations at the moment? I keep talking about it in the lead up to Easter and how conversations are good. I did a little bit, what was that, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, where I mentioned the importance of conversations. And I want to tell you a story, and then I'm going to get some interaction happening, but I'll come to that, and that includes the people who are watching online. When I was about 16, in a little bit of my naivety, but I was very enthusiastic back then. I just worked out that the church said yes to young people when you asked whether you could do things. And I was wanting to see, I just wanted to be involved. And in my naivety, I volunteered to go on the church's stewardship committee. And they said yes. Does anybody know what a stewardship committee does? I told you I was naive. I had no idea what I was volunteering for. And a stewardship committee is the group of people that look after the giving of finances in our offerings to the church. Now, I grew up in an era that was just at the end of that era where not only did we encourage people to give to the church like we do now, we used to record what people gave to the church. If you had those little envelopes, do you know what I'm talking about? And they were all numbered and you could record what people were giving it week by week. Even better, part of the role of the stewardship committee that I was on is that we had to go around I think it was 1 year, but then they moved it to 2 years. Every 2 years we had to visit everybody in the church and ask them whether or not they would like to consider increasing their giving. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But that's what we used to do. And so here I am, I'm 16 years old on this committee, and everyone on the committee had a responsibility to go visiting somebody to have a conversation about their giving. And so I get given a list of people to visit. I'm 16 years old and I'm getting given this list. Now, obviously, they were being kind to me because the first person on my list was the nicest couple. They were an elderly couple. This picture that I've got on the screen is not unlike the couple I was given. This elderly couple in the church. It was like going to speak to Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus about presents. You know, it was that sort of, they're so nice. And so I've rocked up to their place, not knowing what to expect. I had my little card that they had to fill in about their giving, and I've gone into their kitchen where they had made cookies for me to eat while they had the conversation. And I'm sitting at their table, and they're just about to fill in the form. But remember, I'm naive here. And so I've gone, just wait. You're well past retirement age here. You don't earn any money, you're retired. How does this work? I said, how do you even give money to the church? Me and my naivety didn't think that retired people get any money. I just thought that, and so I said, how does this work? They started to talk to me, and we had this conversation about not only, investments and how they earn money in retirement, but they also then went on to talk about why they've made the decisions they've made in their life about giving to the church. Even better, they pull out their Bible and start showing me Bible references of where they've made their decisions about how they've gave, and I'm sitting there going, so you seriously give 10% of your money to the church, your income? And they're explaining why they made that decision. And I'm saying, well, but don't you have not enough money? And they explained a little bit about, well, they've always found that they have had enough money when they've done, it was a huge conversation. I was changed by it. I walked away from it going, I've got new insights, but it also impacted upon my own decision making when it came to giving to the church. But conversations can do that, can't it? Conversations have got the ability to, really touch us deeply. Has anyone got their Bible on their phone or a Bible nearby? I wanted to look at a story that happened in Acts chapter 15. Acts chapter 15. And I don't have it on the screen, so I'm going to need a little somebody just to read out a tiny bit for me. But let me give you the context. In Acts chapter 15, the early church was wrestling with a difficult decision. They were wrestling, actually, I think if you read the beginning part of it, it talks about circumcision, but that's just a small part of the bigger problem that they had in the early church, which was this question of, do new Christians have to follow the Jewish customs? Now, you would think, well, that's easy. The answer is no. But the problem they were wrestling with is that they were told that they needed to walk in the way of Jesus, follow the example of Jesus. They were actually called people of the way because they were walking in the way of Jesus, following that example. And did Jesus follow the Jewish customs? Yes, Jesus did. So it wasn't as simple as just saying, just because you're not Jewish, you're Christian, you don't have to do it, because they're following the example of Jesus, who followed the Jewish customs. So they had to work out, well, did they have to do these customs and rituals or not? How did they solve that problem? Has anybody got, I'm not actually sure what verse I'm supposed to start on here. Let me look it up. I've got a Bible in front of me. Has anyone got it in front of them and wants to come out the front and read just a couple of verses of how they actually started to wrestle? Oh, it's from verse 1. I think it goes down to about verse 10. Verse 11. Does anybody want to come and read? You might have to come out to the microphone so the people at home. We're just going to read this tiny bit from Acts 15, verses 1 to 11. I don't have it on the screen.
Oh. I'll read this. Some men came down from Judea to Antioch and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom taught by Moses, you cannot be saved. This brought Paul and Barnabas into sharp dispute and debate with them. So Paul and Barnabas were appointed, along with some other believers, to go up to Jerusalem to see the apostles and elders about this question. The church sent them on their way, and as they travelled through Phoenicia and Samaria, they told how the Gentiles had been converted. The news made all the brothers very glad. When they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church and the apostles and elders, to whom they reported everything God had done through them. Then some of the believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees stood up and said, "The Gentiles must be circumcised and required to obey the law of Moses." The apostles and elders met to consider this question. After much discussion, Peter got up and addressed them. "Brothers, you know that some time ago God made a choice among you that the Gentiles might hear from my lips the message of the gospel and believe. God, who knows the heart, showed that he accepted them by giving the Holy Spirit to them, just as he did to us. He made no distinction between us and them, for he purified their hearts by faith. Now then, why do you try to test God by putting on the necks of the disciples a yoke that neither we nor our fathers have been able to bear? No, we believe it is through the grace of our Lord Jesus that we are saved, just as they are." Okay. The whole assembly became silent as they listened to Barnabas and Paul telling about the miraculous signs and wonders God had done among the Gentiles through them. When they finished, James spoke up. "Brothers, listen to me. Simon has described to us how God at first showed his concern by taking from the Gentiles a people for himself. The words of the prophets are in agreement with this. As it is written, 'After this I will return and rebuild David's fallen tent. Its ruins I will rebuild and I will restore it, that the remnant of men may seek the Lord, and all the Gentiles who bear my name, says the Lord, who does these things that have been known for ages.'"
Yep, that's...
Is that all right?
You've covered the part I wanted, so excellent. It goes on, and ultimately James says, I think this is what we should do. But did you hear that line there, after much discussion? Like, they've got this problem in the early church. What do? They get everybody together and talk about it. They're going, it's through the conversation that we're going to have that we're going to try and come to some sort of resolution. And just the highlights, Acts chapter verse 6, the apostles and the elders met to consider the question. Consider's the other word I've been using a lot of lately. But the interesting part was it wasn't just the apostles. And it wasn't just the apostles and the elders. They include different voices, including people who were just normal people. They're going, we want to hear your experience of what's happening here. You know, I really appreciated your prayer earlier, Rach, because I think we have let down certain groups of people. And one of the big ways that the church has let people down is by not allowing their voices to be heard at different times throughout history. And so, you know, I think it's important that they included the different voices, not just the people who thought like them. And they respectfully listened to each other when they're trying to discuss. I like that line you read it out in verse 12. The whole assembly became quiet when they were talking. You know, they weren't just trying to argue their point. They were genuinely trying to hear each other. And at the end is actually another part there that's saying, you know, they're trying to work out where is God in all of this? What does God want us to do? And then they come to some sort of consensus through the conversation. But I was just really impressed with the way that the early church approached this. You know, here is a real life issue. What do we do? How does our faith spring into this? And they've done that through conversation. And in a sense, that has been my goal for Easter and Lent this year, is to have the conversations, whether it's about crazy questions like we're doing in the Bible study group, or having other conversations at different points in time, to encourage us to talk about life and faith and see what emerges when we talk to each other. Let's listen to each other's voices and see what emerges. Now, the reading that AJ read out for us included the line, consider Jesus. Actually, it said consider him, but here they're talking about Jesus. Consider Jesus. And I would argue that we need to be doing that in all that we do. In all our conversations, we need to be considering Jesus. Not only the example that Jesus said, not only the teachings, but almost consider, you know, how our faith connects with our real life. So here's my challenge for tonight. I'm going to invite us to have some discussion trying to put this into practice. I preached half this sermon in the morning 2 weeks ago. If you want to hear the other half of the sermon, go and listen to that one. But I was thinking for night church, it would be better if we actually tried to do this. And so I've got 3 real life situations here. And I'm going to encourage us, just with the people around us or with the people online, choose a real life situation and say, what does our faith speak into this? But in particular, what does the Easter story that we've been looking at so far, that we're going to continue to look at next week when we interview Isaac, what are we exploring? How do we take some of this Easter story and connect it with real life questions? So here are the 3 examples I've given you. A person has experienced a lot of suffering and bad things happen in their life. Comes from a real example where a lady said to me, I know people get dealt different hands in life, some good, some bad, but she says, I've just got all bad hands. And I said, surely that isn't the case. And she told me her story. It was the case. She got unbelievable suffering in her life. And by the end of it, I'm even going, why does God allow this? How can this happen to one person like this? So imagine that person is having a conversation with you and they ask you the question they asked me, well, where's God in all of this? Tell me what I should be doing. Answer the question of how do I connect my faith with this real life issue. The second conversation is that you're sitting around with a group of people and the issue of death comes up. I know that's unlikely in our culture because nobody likes talking about death. But let's just pretend it has. And one person is talking about their fear of death, especially the fear of the unknown. Another person starts talking about theories of the afterlife, and especially they love the idea of reincarnation. How do you connect your faith into a real life situation? Has anyone had that sort of a conversation? It's not that unusual. Except that people don't like talking about death. The third one, you're having a debate about the blame others or reflect culture that's in the current state of politics at the moment. Have you noticed that? Nobody wants to take responsibility. It's their fault. Or if it is my fault, I'm never going to admit it. I'm just going to deflect until you forget. And how politicians are rarely honest or rarely admit guilt if they are at fault. If you want an example, the week we've just had in Australian politics, how do you connect the real life, our faith, with that real life issue? Particularly, how do you connect any part of the Easter story with this? You got the idea? These aren't supposed to be easy. But I think if we're in large enough groups and listen to each other, we might be able to actually go, you know what? There's something about that story that fits in with the Easter story, and maybe those two can speak together. Got the idea? I'm going to give us about 5, 6, 7 minutes. Turn with the people around you. I would suggest it's better being in groups of maybe 5 or 6 rather than 2 for this one, because you're going to have to listen to the different voices. For the people who are online, yes, Stephen, that's a very young Phil. I'm reading the comments that's coming through. For the people online, I will be happy to have some conversations with you online while we're doing this, and then I'll read some of your feedback back to the larger group. So let's split up 5 or 6 minutes, see how we go. Mixture of ages would be good too, because different voices, you hear different things. I'm going to give you about 60 more seconds. For those people who are watching online and wondering why there's been a blank screen for the last minute, we're having a discussion. So finish the discussion that you're in. Jenny says that all our answers are often trite. I agree, Jenny. For me, it's experiencing God's presence in those moments that get me through. But how do you share that with someone who doesn't share your faith? Very good point, Jenny. Maybe it's more about being Christ to that person than explaining Christ. But when asked a direct question, an explanation is being asked for. Yes, I agree with that too, Jenny. All right. I don't want to stop this. There seems to be good discussion going here at the moment. For those people watching online, there's 4 groups and 3 of the 4 are still deep in conversation. The 4th group are saying they're being respectful and a stop for me. All right, I'm going to draw you back. I'm going to ask one question, but I am asking if anybody wants to make a comment to come out the front here. But did people find it hard trying to say, well, if this is a real life situation, how do I connect my faith to it? Is that hard? I want to say that yes, it is hard. And it always has been hard. You just got to read the theologians over the centuries. And I think Christians throughout the ages have struggled by saying, here is real life, here is my faith, how do I connect the two together? And yet that is what we're called to do. We are actually called to do this, to have a considered faith and being able to ponder how our faith speaks into these conversations. Now, did anyone try and tackle the first one, the one about suffering? Yes? Did you have any comments about how you may be able to do that? Beck just said they found it really hard. I'm assuming people in the building heard that, but for the people online, Beck was just saying it's hard. You've got to come from an empathetic angle. Is that the right word? Yes. That it's very difficult to say, well, don't worry, Jesus died for our sins, to somebody who is suffering. Did anyone, any other group talked about that one? Yeah.
I think one of the things that Johnny raised was that, in fact, during the last year of COVID and things, while previously a lot of people held their sort of sufferings and anxieties in, they sort of came out a lot more because we were all in the same boat.
Yeah.
You feel that that has helped a lot in that sort of thing, by making us all sort of level a bit. It doesn't answer the question.
Yeah. So that comment for the people online was COVID's actually helped us be a little bit more open about the suffering that we've been going through, because we all went through it last year. We were all in the same boat. Yeah. Yes, Chris. Suffering, yes. Yes, although, can I use your comment, Megan, that you said in the group? You said that sometimes saying that to a person who is a non-Christian is really hard. Like Megan was saying, that she knows a person who works in a hospital who says, I can't be a Christian because of the suffering that I've seen. It's just too hard to reconcile those two things together. Paul. Paul's opening a really interesting question that we'll have to discuss afterwards, Paul, about levels in heaven. Yes, when I grew up, I was very interested in the levels in heaven because I was imagining I was going to need binoculars, I was going to be so far away from Jesus. I've developed my theology since then, but yeah, we'll talk about that. That's a really interesting topic. Yep. Yes, Rach. Yeah.
Because I think sometimes what we go through really shapes our theology. I think it's for someone who, there are people who believe that God controls everything from my heart and spot to, and that level of control is everything down to nothing that God is not able to control, if that makes amongst human suffering. And I think so much of what we experience in life shapes where we sit on that spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think if someone's really suffering, that they need the companionship of God that's saying to them, maybe God doesn't actually have anything to do with it, but He's with you. I find that really helpful.
So I'll try and summarise that for the people online. How do we understand the involvement of God in suffering? Because sometimes people think that God controls everything, and therefore that makes that a very difficult question. Sometimes we don't think that God is in control of those things, and maybe that's a little bit more helpful to see God in part of that. I read a theologian who wrote a great paper on that, who basically said, is there examples in the Bible of God causing suffering? And the answer is yes, but it's extremely rare. Job is an example of that, but it's extremely rare. And he went through these, is there examples in the Bible of people doing dumb stuff and the suffering coming to them as a result of that? Yes, that is more common. But then he finished off by saying, is there examples in the Bible of stuff just happening because we live in a broken world, whatever you want to call it, stuff happens. And he said, yes, that's most of the time. And I found that really helpful to put that into context. That, people go, well, why is God causing all this? Well, that's extremely rare. That even if you believe that theology, in the biblical examples, extremely rare. Most of the time in the Bible, stuff just happens. And it's more about how God helps people through those times rather than causing those times. I'm just aware of time. I want to do one thing. I wasn't going to tackle B or C, but I think they're very interesting questions. But I've got a story to finish with of a person who actually had an experience of the Easter narrative speaking to them in a time of suffering and being helpful to them. Would you like to hear that? It's the one that we mainly talked about. This is a story of a woman who had just come out of the hospital. Her mother was dying. Her rest of the family had basically not even bothered to come to visit her mum. She's there by herself. She has no friends that were there supporting her, and she's feeling extremely alone. And she's taken, 15 minutes out of this process of sitting with her dying mother to just walk outside and catch some fresh air. But she is feeling so alone and so just despondent with this whole situation. And she's walking along and she walks past a Catholic church that just happens to be open. And she finds herself wandering into the Catholic church. And she's in this little side chapel that's basically only got about, 5 seats and a little table up the front, but a massive crucifix on the wall like Catholic churches sometimes do. And she's just looking at this crucifix with Jesus on the cross, and everything just wells up in her, and she starts screaming at the cross and basically going, what is going on, Jesus? You're supposed to be helping me and nobody's here. And she's just letting it rip to this, stone Jesus on a cross. Just letting it rip, and all her frustration and emotion and fear and everything's just pouring out of her. And she's almost like pointing her finger and accusing Jesus for not being here to help and not being... And suddenly, she finds herself screaming at this Jesus, you don't know what it's like to be all alone and going through this horrible thing. You've never been left alone in your life. And suddenly the words of the Easter story comes back to her, my God, why have you abandoned me? And she just breaks down crying, and she suddenly realises this stone Jesus actually does understand. And I don't know, I find that an amazing story. But to me, it gives me hope to go, our faith can actually speak into real life situations. And there will be times when that might be supernatural, like her experience, or it could just be, we will just realise, actually, this does work. That lady, I shared the story before, who so many bad things happen, and she asked me as her minister, well, tell me what I should do. And the only answer I could give her was read the Psalms. I don't know where that came from. It popped into my head. I said, read the Psalms. Psalm 1 is not a good psalm to give to somebody who's suffering. I'll just put it out there. But she got to Psalm 10 and then Psalm 14 and then Psalm 40 and then there's a whole bunch of them where the psalmists are very real, going, I feel abandoned, I feel alone, my bones are aching, my soul cries out, where are you, God? But I think it's Psalm 40 that the last 2 lines are, yet I will trust in you, my God. And she goes, if the psalmist can do that, maybe I can too. If the psalmist can trust in God even in the midst of this horrible situation, then maybe she can trust in God in this situation too. So I'm just going to encourage you that I think our faith and life can connect, but we have to, be open to having the conversations to help that emerge. We're going to be doing more of this, particularly in the Bible study groups. But in 2 weeks' time, next week we get to hear from Isaac and a little of his story. It's going to be so exciting. But the week after, we're going to be looking particularly at the cross and how do we connect, the theological understanding of the cross with the real life stuff that we're dealing with. So, a bit similar to tonight.